Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you've had a wonderful week so far. I've missed seeing you guys, but I will see y'all soon. So, last week, over the past 2 weeks, we've been working on our maps of each continent. Okay. And so, we're going to be breaking down the constituents of the earth. Okay. Remember, we talked about this. Man, I mean, it was forever ago, probably 3 weeks. Okay. There are three constituents. Okay. We're going to be talking about we're going to break each one down. Okay. The first one is land, the second one is water, and then the third one is what? The air or the atmosphere. That's right. All right. So we're going to break down land. Okay. First, I want to read something to you guys. Okay. Without the knowledge of physical geography, we look upon the earth and its diverse agents. As a young apprentice may be supposed, when he first enters the machine shop, to look at various parts of the steam engine which he sees there lying about, but ready to be put together. There they are, all the different parts, flywheel and crank, piston, valve and ratchet, steam chest and boiler. Though they have so little resemblance to each other and look so little like a compact and powerful machine, yet when he comes to see them put together, to have the fires lightened, steam raised, and the engine started, he discovers at once that each part is made to fit into another and work with its fellow, that the whole is according to design, and that every piece has a special office to fulfill, failing in which the whole machine would be thrown into confusion. So it is, as the study of our science will show, with the terrestrial machine. This is a great illustration of our world. Okay, we've looked at the basics of it. We're going to be diving into it. Okay, everything has a purpose. Okay, God uniquely created the world for his purpose. And we see that the land is a part of his majestic machinery, of his majestic masterpiece. Okay, and we're going to be looking at this, and there's a lot to this. So if you would follow along, all right. All right. So first, we're going to start with the land masses of the globe. All right. So what do I mean by this? This is really the overview of the land. All right. So when we look at the globe, when you break down the proportion of land to water on the globe, it's about a 27 to 72 ratio. Okay. So if you look at it almost at a percent in a sense, 27% of it is land and the rest of it is water. Okay. It's hard to think about because we spend so much time on land, we're not really near an ocean, and so that's hard to fathom, but the bulk of our globe is water, is an ocean or lakes or rivers. Okay. So when we look at the earth, okay, there's 197 million square miles of the earth. When you break this down, only 53 million is covered in land. Okay, that means the other 144 million is covered by water. That is just phenomenal. I mean, there's so much that God put in this earth. Okay, there's this land, even though it's small, even though it's only a small portion of the globe, it is a magnificent piece in God's wonderful mechanism, in God's story, in God's narrative. And we're gonna continue looking at this. And with this, so nearly 3 times as much water to land. It's that simple. Okay, when you look at 27 to 72, when you look at that ratio, it's basically it's three times as much. Okay, that's a lot. All right, so when we continue looking at this, we see that there is distinction within the lands. When you break down all the lands that God created here on the earth, there is division, there is distinction, there are unique elements to each continent. Okay, so and each, I guess, island as well. So when we look at it, so the six larger land masses are called continents. Okay, we see that North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. Okay, the six larger land masses. And then the smaller land masses that are not considered continents are islands. Yes, islands. We see that each of these play a significant role in God's story. In God's story, we see this throughout Scripture. We see that God created everything for His being. We see He created it for His purpose to honor and glorify Him, and so we see that there's distinction in everything. Just how there's distinction in each one of us. That there's something unique, but there's still something that joins us, that unifies us. With this, when we break down, okay, the position of the land masses on the globe, we see that the bulk of the land is going to be located within the northern hemisphere. We see that, North America, Europe, and Asia are all going to be in the northern hemisphere, but then parts of Africa and South America are going to be as well. Okay, we see that the bulk of the land is going to be in the northern hemisphere, and we'll break this down further, once we get further in. But we see that, it joins everyone together up north. It's easier to travel. It's easier to trade. It's easier to communicate with the northern continents. Okay, we've seen this throughout history. We also see that, because they're all surrounding the northern hemisphere, the 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 land near the North Pole is basically, it forms a continuous ring. It's one massive ring, and then it moves southward. It goes south. It doesn't start from south up. It starts from the North Pole in a ring and then spreads out across the world. Because of this, we see that the continents are paired into three groups. We see this God's unique story, God's unique history. Okay, we see that God really paired the continents together. And so, with this, there is a general rule of shape that the continents follow. Okay, that each one kind of has its unique shapes, yes, but there are general principles within each one. And then that the continents spread broadly towards the north, while in the south they taper to points or they throw out peninsulas. Okay, we see this. We see that. Just think about Asia. It's huge. Okay, it's broadly, it stretches out across the north. But then when you think of South America and Africa, what do? That's right. They stick out to points. They go down to smaller points. They're not broad like North America or Asia or Europe. Okay, we see this. Okay, these are some of the general principles that help unify and connect each continent. Okay, so now that we looked at the general principles, now that we looked at some things that unify them, there are also elements that contrast them, that cause them to be unique, that cause them to contradict one another. which is fine. God made it for that very purpose. He made the land for his glory, okay? This land is a perfect mechanism within his magnificent story. It's a cog in a wheel that fits in and that makes the whole machine work. All right, so when we look at this grand terrestrial contrast, so we break it down, not continent to continent, not North America, Europe, and stuff like that. We're looking at each hemisphere for the most part. Okay, so we look at the northern continents, okay, in the northern hemisphere, and then the southern continents in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so there's a couple points that we need to look at. All right, the first one is that North America, Europe, Asia are all in the northern continents, okay, are all in the northern hemisphere. But then 2/3 of Africa and then a portion of South America are in this northern hemisphere. So we see that the bulk of the land masses are in where? That's right, Kufal. The northern hemisphere. I just said that. The northern hemisphere. Okay, it's where God planned civilizations, okay, which gets into our next point in the northern continents. We see that the northern continents are the seat of knowledge, the seat of power, the seat of civilization. The Israelites were in Asia. Okay, that's where God's story, God's history of his people started. And then they moved to Europe. Okay, we see this the the Knights Templar, the Martin Luther, with his 95 Thesis, England, we see all this. And then we see that the colonists, they move from Europe to North America. We see that this power, this knowledge, and this civilization all remains in the northern continents. Even to present day, South America, Australia, and Africa do not play a part in the seat of power or the seat of civilization or the seat of knowledge. Yes, they benefit those, but they are not the root of it. They are not the main individual in that area. So when we look at this, because okay, we had just talked about that the northern continents, all the countries and all the continents are super close together. That means it's going to be the commercial hemisphere. What do we mean by commercial? No, I'm not talking about like an ad on TV where, like a Coca-Cola commercial will come up and tells you, hey, with the polar bears, and they're like, hey, drink this, buy this. No, that's not what I'm talking about technically. Commercial, another word for commercial is trade. It's a trading hemisphere. It's where commerce, it's where we purchase material, trade stuff, okay? When you think of it, if you've ever bought anything from outside the US, where does it normally come from? China or Europe. Very, very, very rarely you will purchase something from Australia, Africa, or South America. Very, very rarely. Most of the time, everything comes from these northern continents. And with this, because there's so much land up in the northern hemisphere in these northern continents, it's going to be considered the land hemisphere. Well, duh. Okay, that's fairly simple because most of the land is up here. Of course, we're going to call it that. All right, so when we contrast or when we look at what's different in the southern continents than the northern continents, it's fairly simple. Okay, what's the opposite of this? Well, first off, we see that part of Africa, so what's not in the northern continent is in the southern continent, is in the southern hemisphere. We see that the bulk of South America and then all of Australia. So we see that very little land masses are in this area. Okay, the bulk of them are in the northern hemisphere. Okay, we see that contrast, we see that difference. When we move down, we see that these continents have never been the seat of power. They have never been the seat of knowledge or the seat of civilization. Yes, there are elements there. Yes, they might have some power. Yes, they might have some knowledge. Yes, they might have some civilization, but they are not going to be the one ruler. Okay, they're not going to be the individual that everyone looks to for this. Okay, when we think of the American Revolution, the seat of power was Great Britain. Okay, that's what it was. When we think of, you know, a long time ago, China, Mongolia used to be the seat of power with Genghis Khan. The United States, we are a seat of power. We've been a seat of power for almost 100 years now, probably. Okay, we see this. We see this play out. Okay, they are not going to be a place of power, of knowledge, or of civilization. That's how God created it. And so, because the bulk of the land is up in the northern hemisphere, and that means the bulk of the water is going to be in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be considered the water hemisphere. Oh, yeah, that makes so much sense, Mr. Spencer. Oh, thank you. Yes. Yes, the water hemisphere. Duh. What's opposite of land? Water. Yes, it makes sense. Okay. So the southern continents and the northern continents are going to contrast. Okay. Yes, they do have some similarities. We just looked at some brief ones and we looked at some when we did our mapping, and we'll look at some further into this lesson, but we see that they also have contrast. There's differences in them that make them unique to their area, that make them unique to God's purpose. All right, so when we look at this, we see that there are 3 pairs of continents. Okay, we talked about this. This is how they also are broken up and how they're going to contrast one another and how they're going to be unified. Okay, so Eastern and Western worlds, one pair is North and South America. Pretty simple. They're both named after each other. I mean, America, North America, South America. Duh, they're going to be a pair. The second pair is going to be Europe and Africa. Okay, so if you're looking down at the map, basically it's whatever continents are right below each other or right above each other. Okay, and then the last one is Asia and Australia. Okay, those are the continents that are going to be paired together, that are going to be looked at. We also see that another way that you can identify and contrast the land masses or the land continents are by continental and oceanic worlds. So what do I mean by that? Well, we'll get into this later in this lesson, but we see that continental is going to be mainly in the northern hemisphere, okay? What that means is that all the islands, everything's going to be closer together, okay? It's going to be closer to larger land masses. Where in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be considered oceanic, which means that all the islands are going to be further away from the land, okay? They're going to be off in the middle of nowhere. They're going to be off in islands and, by themselves, not close to anything else, not close to any large masses. Okay, so we'll look at these contrasts further in, and you'll have a better understanding of them here in a minute, okay? Okay, so when we look at this, we see that the bulk, if you look up here, okay, continental, we see a lot of islands grouped close together. Okay, we see a lot of these grouped together. When you come down to South America, there's a lot of islands out here that are displaced, that are not really near the islands, okay, that are not really near the continents, okay? We also see, just like our peers, our Eastern and Western worlds, okay, North and South America, Europe and Africa, and Asia and Australia. So simple, okay? When you look at the map, you're like, duh, that makes sense. Of course it makes sense. That's how God designed it. God created the land for his unique purpose, for this It's a beautiful mechanism in this overall machinery of the earth. It's a part of it. It's not the whole, it's a part of it. All right, so forms of relief. Can someone tell me what relief means? You just did all those maps over it. What does relief mean? Okay. Anyone else? All right, pretty good guess. Okay, yeah. Okay, I heard some examples. Okay, relief is really going to be the different type of landforms. Okay, I heard someone say mountains. I heard someone say valleys. Okay, we see those are some examples of a relief. Okay, so we're going to break down the relief or the type of land masses inside of a continent. Okay, like, here in Oklahoma, we're part of the Great Plains. Makes sense. When you go to Colorado, you see, that's right, volcanoes. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Mountains. Okay, we see this. There are different reliefs or landforms. All right, so we're going to break down each one so that we understand what Mr. Spencer means when he says this when we get further into the school year. All right, so plains. Plains are considered the centers of population for fertile and ease to cultivation. What the heck does that mean, Mr. Spencer? Well, can someone tell me? Gauge. That's right. Fertility and easy to cultivation is talking about crops. What is Oklahoma known for? One of the greatest products we have. That's right. Well, oil, yes, is one, but we're talking about corn, wheat, crops. We're talking about crops. Okay. A plain was created to grow crops, to cultivate, to grow the necessary equipment or the necessary food for people to survive. So, what classifies something as a plain? Well, it has a limited elevation above sea level. Okay, it's not a mountain. It's not hundreds or thousands and thousands of feet above sea level. No, it's going to be just barely above. Okay, or maybe even sometimes even in some places. We see that with these plains, they are usually and most likely covered in various grasses. Now, there are some trees, but most plains are lacking in trees. Usually it's going to just be extremely flat and extremely bare when it comes to trees. All right, so there are three types of plains that are considered throughout the world. Okay, there's alluvial, undulating, and marine. Okay, those are the three types we'll look at in a second. Now, some examples of plains throughout the world are called the prairies, the prairie plains here in North America. That's where Oklahoma is located. That's where Kansas, part of Texas, North and South Dakota, part of Colorado, part of Missouri. We see this. Okay, the prairie plains, and it extends up to, north to Canada. Okay, all the way up through North America. Okay, we see this. In South America, the term for plains is called Pampas or Llanos. Llanos, I think, in South America. All right, it's the same thing. Okay, they have plains down in South America as well, but they don't call them plains, prairie plains. Okay. All right, so the steppes in Asia is term for plains. And then we see in the Amazon, which is located where? You put it on a map a little bit ago. Can anyone remember? That's right, South America, okay? Within South America, around the Amazon, okay, there's this densely wooded plains just covered. It's a massive forest, and it's called the selvias, not selvias, selvas, okay? We see that these are different terms that are called for plains throughout the globe, throughout the world. Okay, these play a specific purpose for the world. Okay, this is where the bulk of people grow crops, where we get our food source for the world throughout all of history. All right, so when we look specifically at each type of plains, okay, so what we just looked at, we were just looking at examples. Now we're going to look at the information, the parts of a plain, what makes each one a little bit different. Okay, so what we see is marine plains. Okay, marine plains, when you think of marine, you think of what? You think of water. That's right. Yes, water. Marine animals, aquatic animals. Okay, that's what this is. Okay, a the marine plains were thought, okay, studied, thought to have been at one point the floor of the sea. And so, because they were at the bottom of the ocean, or they were once the floor of the sea, we see that there are going to be large amounts of saline deposits. And so, these saline pockets are going to provide resources and are going to provide remains for us to study. We see that within these, we have found research and have studied the remains of these animals, these plants within this area. And we're seeing that these are animals that have to survive in salt water. They can't just live on land by themselves. They have to survive in some type of area. They have to survive in an area that's covered with salt, okay, salt water. Okay. Two areas that are unique and are considered marine plains are the Atlantic seaboard and then the Caspian region, which are both located in Asia. Okay, these areas are going to have a lot of fossils and a lot of remains of animals and plants that are found in the oceans. Okay, so this is unique. This is something unique to these regions. We don't see this a lot over here in North America, but we see this over in Asia and some other parts of the globe over there. All right, another type of plain is the alluvial plain. Okay, this plain is formed from materials washed down from hills and mountains by rains and rivers. It's fairly simple. Okay, anything that gets swept down from the mountaintops and from these hills and all that, and then they gather up towards the bottom are going to form these plains. They're going to form these pockets. Okay, and so some examples of these alluvial plains are the Valley of the Nile. Okay, we've heard this. Okay, where's the Valley of the Nile? That's right, it's in Egypt. It's where a portion of the Bible takes place, where we see Moses, okay, where we see, you know, the plagues, okay, the Passover. Okay, we see this. Okay, the Valley of the Nile, we know that. Okay, this is an example of an alluvial plain. Okay, the valley of it. Okay, the Delta of the Mississippi. Okay, part of the Mississippi River, the Delta area. Okay, a valley, a plain area. that is going to be an example of the alluvial plains. And then in India, there's the uh, Gigantic plains, the Indo-Gigantic plains. Okay, and this is going to be from uh, the rivers moving materials, okay, rocks, dirt, soil into this valley. Okay, because of this, these are going to be considered some of the most productive portions of the surface of the globe. Okay, why would they be the most productive surface? Can anyone tell me? Anna? That's right. There is water. What do you need to grow crops? You need water. You need good soil. The best place to grow crops is where you have a reliable water source. What better place than beside a river or where it rains a lot? And so this is the greatest thing. We see these three areas: Valley of the Nile, Delta of the Mississippi, the Indo-Gigantic plains. We see this. These are all near massive rivers. And they're going to provide a lot of water, which will help sustain the products, which will help supply and grow the necessary crops for this. All right, so the next type of relief that we're going to talk about that serves God's purpose, that is a function, that is a mechanism in the land of God's plan, are plateaus. Can anyone tell me what the heck is a plateau? That sounds so weird. What is a plateau? Gavin, what is a plateau? Okay, so it's not a mountain. Okay, I like what you're saying. It's tall, but it's not a mountain, and it's also short, but not like a plain. Okay, so maybe it's that middle area. It's between plains and mountains. Okay, good. But what makes a plateau unique? What makes it distinct? Alana? Ha, that is correct. It has a flat top. Okay, we see this. Okay, a plateau, okay, are going to be these areas that are raised above the sea level, okay, above the surrounding areas. So usually they're going to be out kind of about, if you look at these pictures, everything's kind of flat and then they just shoot up and then they drop off. But what we also see that makes them unique is that at the top of the elevation, okay, at the top of these hills or mountains, okay, they are flat. Okay, if you look at these plateaus, they're flat. You can walk across them. You can live up there. If you've ever been maybe to, if you've ever driven to like Colorado and you drove through the Panhandle, you probably saw some. We have some here in Oklahoma. They're called like the Black Mesas. Okay, the Black Mesas are massive plateaus just out in the middle of nowhere. It's flat, 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 and then boom, this massive plateau, and it's flat up top. And on some, you can take stairs and you can walk all the way up to top and then see for miles. I mean, it's so beautiful. But this is what this is. What we also see about these is that these plateaus, they vary in elevation across the globe. Okay, sometimes some are a couple thousand feet in elevation, some in some continents and in some countries are only a couple hundred feet. Okay, they vary in their location, they vary where they're at. And so because the plains, what we were just talking about, are going to be the most productive areas in the globe, we're going to see that plateaus are going to be the opposite. They are going to be considered some of the most unproductive parts of the globe. The bulk of them are going to be out in deserts. If you've ever been to the Panhandle, parts of it are great for growing crops. A lot of wheat, you'll see maybe some cotton, some corn. But near these plateaus, if you've ever been around the Black Mesa, it's pretty much just a lot of rock. Not a lot can grow. Only very specific crops can grow out there that can sustain a lot of heat, very little uh, moisture, and so that. And so we see that these plateaus, they're not going to be a place for civilization and power. Okay, why would they not be a place for civilization and power? Thatcher? Okay, I like that. Good, good. Kiki, what do you think? Why won't plateaus be a civil place for civilization and power? That's right. Yes, I like what both of you all said. If you cannot grow crops and there's not a lot of water, how are you going to survive? If there's not a lot out there and there's some of the most unproductive parts of the globe, who would want to survive? I don't know about y'all. I used to backpack a lot up in Colorado for several weeks at a time. I went camping all the time. If you've ever gone camping and you've ran out of water, what do? You find a water source. If there's no water near you, you're going to die. Yeah, so that's why if they're not going to be a center for civilization of population and power, because there's if you can't grow a lot, if you can't get a lot of water, it's hard to thrive, it's hard to survive for a long period of time. So we see that. All right, so when we look at our next type of relief, okay, they're going to be mountains. Okay, so when you hear of mountains, what do you instantly think of? Okay, the Rocky Mountains. I think I heard someone say Mount Everest. Okay, we see that mountains are these massive land masses that stick out of the earth, that come to a point that are much larger than plateaus. Okay, so we see that mountains are capable of standing alone. Okay, we see this bottom picture. Okay, Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. It, for the most part, it stands alone. There's not really many other mountains in that area. Okay, that clearly God can do whatever He wants. Okay, but generally, when we look at mountains and when we study mountains, the bulk of them are going to be formed together in a series. Okay, like the Rocky Mountains right here up top. Okay, that is a series of mountains. Okay, the Rocky Mountains. Okay, it's not just a mountain, there are multiple mountains in it. And so when we look at this, we see that a series is called a mountain chain or a mountain range. Okay, so Rocky Mountain chain, Appalachian chain, the Ural range. Okay, these mountains, it's just the lingo that people will use. All right, so the top of the chain is called the crest. Okay, in that mountain range or in that mountain chain, the top of that chain is called the crest. And within this mountain range, it's usually within the range, there's usually multiple mountains within that system. Okay, it's usually not just one. They're formed along each other or around each other or near each other, and so this is going to create a mountain system. Okay, a mountain system. And so with these mountains, they are going to form a type of depression or a an area which is lower than this. Okay, what do you call an area that is in between two mountains, which is extremely low, kind of creates like a U shape? Kufa. That is right. A valley. Okay, the valleys are going to be the type of relief that we talk about next. Okay, we see this in the picture. Here's a mountain, and then here's that depression. Okay, that drop. Okay, and then it's going to increase in elevation again to mountains on the other side, part of that mountain system. And we see so valleys are going to be classified as depressions through which usually water courses run. Okay, we see this. Okay, we see a small river, okay, coming through here. Okay, when it rains up on top of a mountain, where's it going to go? It's going to run down the mountain. Duh. It's not going to stay up there. It's going to naturally flow downward. It's going to go down to the bottom of that valley. Okay, so we see that every mountain range, okay, is going to be intersected by a valley or multiple valleys. And within every mountain system, these valleys are going to be separating its parallel ranges. Okay, so a mountain range is one type of system. Okay, not system, is one type of mountain area, okay, like the Rockies. And then on the other side, if there's a parallel or a mountain range that is running right beside it, there's that valley that's separating it. Okay, so when you look at this picture, here's a mountain range right here, a mountain range over here. And so this entire thing is called a mountain system. And there's a valley that is separating it, okay, with this water that is intersecting it, that is separating it, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Because these valleys that intersect these ranges, okay, this range and this range, okay, this is a separate range, this is a separate range. These valleys are called transverse. They are called transverses. So we see that God created all of this for his unique purpose. God is creating this for his story. Okay, this land, it's unique. It plays a part of this overall picture. It plays a part of the wonderful mechanism called Earth. And so when we look at this, valleys, okay, those that are lying between parallel ranges, okay, we just looked at that picture, and then we see this again, okay, for an example, here's a range, and here's a range, and then here's the valley, okay. Those that are lying between parallel ranges and having therefore the same general direction are called longitudinal. Okay, so I'm going to go back real quick. Okay, so if the ranges are going different directions, okay, those are called transverse. And then the ones that are running parallel, that are running right beside each other, are going to be that valley is going to be called a longitudinal valley. Okay, so when we look at this, that when God was creating the valleys, the mountains, when he was creating the earth within those 6 days, we see that there's going to be a part of this that he has done. Okay, we see that due to the folding process of the mountains. Okay, when God is establishing these higher points, that the action of the running water widening and deepening them. Okay, so we see that, when God is establishing His way, when God is establishing the earth, the rivers that are running through, that are making these mountains, steeper and taller, are going to widen and deepen the valley. Okay, it's going to cause that valley to deepen because of that water source. Okay, we see that this is what's going to form that valley. Okay, the more the folding, the greater the mountain, the more amount of water running through that is going to cause that valley to widen out and to deepen. It's going to be a lot deeper than maybe this picture right here, where the mountains are not as tall, are not as wide, and there's not as much water running through it. And so with that, we are going to break down each continent now. Okay, we looked at some of the general ideas. We looked at the forms of relief, the different types of relief. We did those maps for the past 2 weeks, and we looked at valleys and plains and rivers and mountains. And so now we're going to look at each continent, what makes them unique and what makes them similar. All right, so first we need to see what are the basic ideas. What are the basic laws to a continent? What makes them all unique? What makes them unique in God's character? All right, so there are 4 points that create the general laws of continental relief. The first one is that in each continent, there are similar parts. Okay, the typical structure, well, these similar parts are going to be a primary highland, a secondary highland, and then a depression between the two. Okay, so the typical structure of a continent has a primary highland region upon one side, a secondary highland on the opposite side, trending towards the primary, okay, heading towards the primary highland, and then in between the two, there is a depression between the two. Okay, that is the general idea for the continents, for all 6. Now, each one has some unique elements to it, but for the most part, they all follow that to a T. All right, so when we look at the Old and New World, okay, this is thinking back to the Old World, such as Asia, Africa, and Europe, and then the New World being North and South America. We see that when we contrast the two, we see that in the New World, there is north and south direction prevails alone. That all the great lines of elevation extending in that direction. So we see that the further north and the further south, okay, that's how they run. They run in a very similar pattern from the Arctic Ocean or the Arctic Circle up north all the way down to Antarctica in the south. Okay, we see that. Okay, that is the general idea. Now, that is not the case for the Old World. Okay, the Old World, it runs opposite. Okay, it's going to run east to west. It's going to run from left to right. Okay, that's how it is in the Old World. The Old World, the east-west direction predominates. but it is repeatedly intersected by the other. Okay, now yes, there are some mountains and some elevation that runs north to south, but the bulk of the mountains in Asia, Europe, and Africa are going to run east to west. Okay, makes sense. Okay, that's how those are the first two general rules. Okay, that's how there's uniqueness but also similarity in between the continents. Okay, rule number 3: the continental reliefs as a whole first begin with a vast low plains about the Arctic Circle and then increase in altitude towards the equatorial regions. Okay, so the closer to the equator they get, the what? That's right, Fisher. The higher at elevation it gets. So up near the Arctic Circle, up, way up north, it's going to be rather flat, maybe a little bit elevation. But the further south you go, the more elevation you get. Now, that's not true for some specific cases, but that is the general law. Okay, that is God's general plan for the earth. Okay, and then the fourth rule that we see for the general laws of continental relief is that dominant form of relief, okay, for each continent. In general, each continent has one dominant form of relief, which gives it a special character, exerting a powerful influence upon its climate and upon its functions, both in nature and in human history. Okay, so what's a relief? Carly, what's a relief? That's right. Okay, different type of land forms. Okay, we just talked about them. Mallory, give me an example. All right, yes, there's valleys and mountains. Nate, what do you have? Okay, plateaus and plains. Okay, we see that those are the reliefs. Okay, with so what this last law is saying is that each continent, so the six each have a unique dominant relief. Maybe it's a mountain system, or it's a plain, or it's a plateau. Whatever character, whatever form of relief it has, that is going to be what controls the climate. What controls the nature, what controls how humans live and survive and thrive on that continent. Okay, so we see that this we will get into specifics about this, further into the school year, but we see that these are the general laws of continental relief. This is how God created the earth. This is the mechanism that is used for God's purpose for the earth. Okay, the land is a part of God's wonderful mechanism. Okay, so we're going to break down each continent. Okay, we're going to start with North America. So within North America, there is general information. There's a general idea about it. Okay, we talked about this. This was one of the first laws. Okay, it's one of the 4 laws. North America has a primary highlands. On the opposite side, it has a secondary highlands, and then in the middle, it has a Great Depression. Okay, North America follows this to a T. Okay, follows those rules to a T, and we're going to look at each one. So the primary highlands, okay, in North America is going to be to the west. Okay, the Rocky Mountains, okay, Colorado, okay, that area, okay, this is going to be the Pacific Highlands, okay, is another name for it. Okay, the primary highlands or the Pacific Highlands, and it's going to consist of the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevada, and the Cascade Range. Okay, so these three areas, okay, the Pacific Highlands is going to stretch from parts of Alaska all the way south. It's going to hug kind of near California and all that, and it's going to go down to parts of Mexico. Okay, this is going to be the primary highlands. Okay, you outlined this map about 2 weeks ago. Okay, if you can remember that, you should probably have it. I should have handed it back, I think. But you can see this, okay? You can see how this forms a general area. Okay, yes, they might be broken up a little bit, but for the bulk of it, it's going to be one continuous area, okay? These primary highlands. So if you started in Alaska and you worked your way south, we see that the general elevation increases the further south you go. All right, so within each area, okay, we see that the Rocky Mountains are going to be composed of several parallel mountain ranges. Okay, so the Rocky Mountains is a mountain system. And there are going to be several mountain ranges within it that create this system. We're going to see that this is going to be huge. It's going to start all the way up in the Arctic Ocean, okay, up in Canada, and it's going to work its way down to the Isthmus of Panama. So it's going to it's going to cover basically the entire continent from north to south. And so when we look at the other two parts of the highlands, we see that the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Mountains are going to run along the Pacific coast. Okay, they're going to run closer to the ocean. Now, the Rocky Mountains are going to be not centralized in North America, but they're going to be pretty close. Okay, in Colorado, it's not too far from here. Okay, so they're going to run near each other, okay, almost parallel. We also see that the altitude of the Sierra Nevada and Cascade Mountains are going to resemble that of the Rocky Mountains. Okay, God created uniqueness. God created similarities in these mountains, in these ranges, in these systems. Okay, He created uniqueness. Now, there's distinction, but there's also similarity. Okay, we see this in God's creation. God creates everything for a specific purpose. Okay, this is another part of His story, another part of Earth's unique function. The land playing a part in His story. All right, so when we look at this, we're going to look at the secondary highlands and then the central region, okay, or the depression. Okay, the central region is going to be the depression. When you look at the map, okay, we see this. If you look way up here, okay, here's the Rocky Mountains extending all the way down to Panama, way down here. Okay, we see this. We see the secondary highlands going to be right here. And then this massive region right here, super flat. This is this central region or the depression region. Okay, so the secondary highlands are over here. South, North Carolina, or Virginia, Tennessee, Maine, New York. Okay, this region right here. And so the secondary highlands are going to be the Appalachian Mountain System and the Plateau of Labrador. Okay, so we see that this is what's going to comprise the secondary highlands. And so there are going to be several ranges within this mountain system. Okay, there's going to be several individual mountain ranges that work all their way up and down the East Coast right here that create the secondary highlands in North America. And so with this, so the Appalachian Mountains, the land descends gradually to a low and narrow coastal plain known as the Tidewater region. Okay, so down here, when you get to Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, yes, there is some elevation, but nothing compared to up here in Tennessee, Kentucky, heading up towards New York. Okay, so this is going to be considered the tidal water region, okay, down here, down south. All right, so that's the secondary highlands. And so the central region is where, if you read that first bullet point, it's in between the primary and the secondary, okay? It's right here. It's in this general area. It's in this middle right here. And it's called the Great Central Plains. Okay, it starts up here in Canada and works its way all the way down to parts of Mexico right here, okay? So we see this central area. Okay, we see that it truly fully extends up here in the Arctic Ocean and works all the way down through Canada into North America, into the U.S., into Oklahoma and Texas, and then into the Gulf of Mexico right here. Okay, so we see this central region. This is, North America follows those general laws to a T. And God created this land for a purpose. It's playing its part. This land is a part of this wonderful mechanism called Earth. All right, so we talked about it earlier. There are pairs of continents. North America is paired with what, Lainey? South America. Correct. North and South America are paired together. So naturally, we're going to talk about South America now. All right, so South America, the general information of South America. First off, is that it is similar to North America. All right, so we see that North America and South America are going to have similar elements. South America is going to follow the general laws of continental relief pretty closely, just like North America. The primary highlands are going to be along the western border, just like North America was. The secondary highlands are going to be on the east, just like North America. And in that central plains, guess what? Lies in between the two highlands, between the primary and the secondary. We see this. North and South America have a lot of similarities. Now, of course, we know that they have differences, but there are similarities between the two. All right, so when we look at first the primary highlands, okay, these are on the western border. And when we talk about these, this is going to be the Andes. The Andes Mountains are going to be the grandest mountain system of the Western Hemisphere. Because remember, we said part of South America is in North America, but it's also in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, so it's to the west, to the left of Europe and Africa. Okay, part of the Western Hemisphere. Okay, this is going to be the grandest mountain system. Okay, we'll look at a map here in a second. But we see that it's going to basically extend through the entire continent. Okay, from the Isthmus of Panama to Cap Horn. What we see is that it's basically almost going to be a continuation of the Rocky Mountain system. Okay, it's going to pick up where it leaves off, and it's going to go through South America. Okay, it's going to cover the entire continent from north to south. Okay, remember we talked about this. One of the rules is that in the New World, okay, in the New World, the mountains run. What was that, Camden? That's right. In the New World, mountains run north to south. Where in the Old World, Europe, Asia, and Africa, mountains run, that's right, Kufal, east to west. Okay, so we see this. This is one of the rules. We see that within the primary highlands, within the Andes mountain system, we see that it is a remarkable for the continuation of their height, for their regularity of form, and for their system of parallel chains. We see that there's a lot of uniqueness, but a huge amount of commonality. Okay, a lot of common factors, similar height, similar form, similar systems. Okay, we see this. All right, so here it is. Okay, it starts up here, Panama, and runs all the way down to Cap Horn, way down here. Okay, we can see it. It stretches the entire continent. Okay, the bulk of it is right here, Bolivia, Chile, part of Argentina, but the bulk of it is right here, but it extends all the way through. All right, so the secondary highlands is going to be called the Brazil highlands. Okay, right here, because the bulk of it's going to be in Brazil. But it's also, these secondary highlands is going to consist of the highlands of Guyana. Okay, the highlands of Guyana. We see this right here, okay? Here is the secondary highlands right here. Remember, the primary highlands and the secondary highlands are going to be split between a Great Depression, a central region, this depression right here. And we'll get to that here in a second. All right, so within the Brazil highlands and the highlands of Guyana, we see that there are broad plateau regions that traversed by nearly parallel ranges of moderate elevation of 5 to 10,000 feet. Okay, we see that these are not full-blown mountains like the Andes right here, the primary highlands, but they have unique elevation. They have distinction out here. Okay, we see that these plateaus are supporting several closely set ridges, the most important of which are the prime mountains. Okay, over here in Brazil. Okay, we see this. We see that the secondary highlands are not going to be as high in elevation, are not going to be as enormous, but they're still going to provide distinction. Okay, they're still following those general principles. All right, and then last but not least, the central region right here. Okay, we see that it is the depression. Okay, this land. Okay, these plains in between the primary, which are the Andes, Mr. Spencer. Yes, the Andes. Thank you, whoever said that. The Andes Mountains, and then the Brazilian highlands and the highlands of Guyana. Okay, we see this over here. All right, so the Central Depression, which is also called the Great Central Plains. Okay, this region right here. Okay, we see it in between the two. These are going to consist of the major river systems, okay? The river basins of the Orocino, okay? The Amazon up here, Orocino down here, and then the La Plata. Okay, the La Plata. This is what's going to form the central region, or the Great Central Plains, between the primary and secondary highlands. This is the rules that we talked about a little bit ago. These are what's going to form the central region. All right. So now that we talked about the first pair, North and South America, we're going to head into the second pair. Can anyone tell me what the second pair was? Remember, they're right above each other, right below each other. That's right, Avery. Europe and Africa. So we're going to start with Europe. All right, so Europe is going to have two distinct differences from the New World, okay, from North and South America. Okay, first off, is that the main axis of elevation extends east to west, okay, not north to south. So, not like the Andean Rocky Mountains that go north to south, okay, that was part of one of the general rules. Okay, we see this. If you're looking at the map, we see that the mountains really run north to east to west, not north to south. For the most part, now, yes, Norway is an example of a north to south range. Okay, it's a little bit different, but for the most part, in the bulk of Europe, it's going to be east to west. We also see that in the old world, the mountains aren't going to run parallel all the time. Okay, they're going to run into each other or not really have any really parallelism as shown in the New World. Okay, we see this. Okay, so we're going to break down the primary highlands, the secondary highlands, and then the central region or that depression. Okay, so looking at this map, where do you think the primary highlands are? What was that, Kufal? Up here? Okay. What was that, Alana? Okay, down here. Okay, so we see our two systems. Okay. Down here, the bulk of the mountains are down here, and this is going to be our primary highlands, way down here. Okay. Our secondary are going to be what we see up here. Okay. The Ural and the Scandinavian mountains up here. Okay. And then if those are our two systems, where would our central plain be? That's right, Gavin. Right in this area, okay, between these mountains, okay, this flat area right here. Good job. All right, so let's break down the primary highlands. Okay, so the primary highlands, okay, it begins with the Pyrenees. And so it's going to begin with the Pyrenees and it culminates in with the Alps. Okay, so that region, okay, it's going to combine in right there. We're going to see that as it moves eastward, okay, so closer to Asia, the Alps break into two mountain systems. Okay, it's going to be the Carpathians to the north, and then the Balkans to the south. Okay, it's going to stretch across, you know, Italy, Germany, and stuff like that, and then it's going to split into two. Okay, the closer it gets to Asia. Okay, we also see that the primary highlands are going to be made up of the Apennines of Italy and the mountains of Greece are going to be included in these primary highlands. Okay, so I'm going to go back real quick. So here we go. The Pyrenees, it's right here. The Alps are up here. The Apennines of Italy right here. Mountains of Greece right here. But then we see the Carpathians are right here. Okay, it splits. These are to the north. To the south right here are the Balkans. Okay, so we see these are the primary regions of the primary highlands of North of Europe. My bad. My bad. All right, so we're gonna break down each one. So the Alps are going to be the most celebrated and historic. Okay, we'll hear about this because that's where the bulk of civilization and history was for hundreds of years. Okay, the Roman Empire, Nazi Germany, the rise of France, the rise of Great Britain had to deal with that a lot. When we look at the World War I, World War II, we see that history revolved around the Alps, okay, because they were a massive barrier or a massive part of Europe from conquering one part and the other. Okay, so we see that the Alps are going to occupy the central position of France and Germany to the north. And so it's going to split that, and it's going to split Italy and push, and it's going to block Italy off to the south. Okay, so we see that it's going to be a barrier, a natural barrier in Europe. Okay, so next we see the Pyrenees are going to be more uniform compared to the Alps. Okay, they're going to be in Spain. Okay, we saw that. Okay, they're going to be connecting Spain and France. However, the problem though, even though they're more uniform, they're all going to, the mountains and the Pyrenees are going to look similar than the mountains in the Alps. They're going to have some more distinction. The problem is that they are going to be taller, they're going to be higher and less practicable than the Alps. Okay, they're going to be harder to cross. They're not going to be as easy to move across. So they're going to be a little bit more problematic. All right, so as we continue through the highlands, we see that the Carpathians are going to separate the plains of Hungary from the rest of the continent. Okay, it's going to separate this country, this region, from the rest of Europe. All right, another mountain range that gets lumped in to this region is going to be the Caucasus. Okay, these mountain ranges is going to stretch from the Sea of Azov to this Caspian Sea. Okay, it's going to create this border around these oceans. Okay, this is going to be basically just, it's going to help separate the part of Hungary. It's going to help basically block off the rest of Hungary from the rest of Europe and Asia. Okay, it's going to help separate parts of the Black Sea, the Sea of Azov, which is north of that, to the east. Okay, towards Europe, towards Asia. All right, we see that within here, the peninsulas are of High Europe. Okay, of High Europe, which is where Norway, Sweden, Finland is. It's going to be it's going to be broken into 3 sections. Okay. Okay, High Europe, my bad. High Europe is going to be the Iberian or Spanish Peninsula to the west. Okay, Spain, Portugal. Okay, which is going to be separated off from the Pyrenees. Italy is the central peninsula, which is in the central part of Europe, and then the Grecian or Greece peninsula is to the east. Okay, so that's High Europe. Low Europe is north. Okay, because it's lower. It's not, doesn't have as much elevation, and it's extremely flat. Okay, so those are the peninsulas of the primary highlands. Okay, that region that we're talking about. We see next, when we look at the secondary highlands, we see that they are going to be composed of the Scandinavian and Ural Mountains. Okay, so the Scandinavian are up here, in this peninsula up here. And then the Ural Mountains is what's going to be the border, the natural border between Europe and Asia. Okay, we talked about that. We did that in our map several weeks ago. Yeah. So the Scandinavian mountains are broad elevated region intersected by deep gloomy valleys. Okay. Some of the fjords are elevated thousands of feet in the air with distinct drops of elevation on the sides. Okay, these mountains up in Scandinavia are going to be called fjords. These elevations are going to be called fjords, and they're almost going to be, in a sense, similar to plateaus where they will distinctly just drop off to the side and have an extremely deep valley. Okay, if you've ever seen any TV shows or images or anything like that of Vikings, this is where a lot of Viking culture will take place up here. And so living in between these mountains and these rivers and lakes, that's where it's going to be at. Okay. These fjords are these massive mountains with distinct drops on the side, not, this gradual elevation where you can walk up, but these extremely cliff-like sides. And then the Ural Mountains, right here, you can partially see them, is the natural barrier between Europe and Asia. Okay, that's what creates the two continents. Okay, that's what separates the two. All right, so that is the primary and the secondary highlands. So now we're going to talk about Low Europe. Okay, Low Europe is the depression of Europe. Okay, so when we look at this, Low Europe is the vast plain lying northeast of the primary highland. Okay, so this region over here. Okay, so what's going to be the borders of it? So the borders northeast, northwest by the Scandinavian mountains. So here's Scandinavian mountains right here. So this is in the northeast. Primary mountains are in the north, southeast right here. So right here is this region, and it goes all the way to the Ural Mountains. Okay, so this massive area right here is going to be Low Europe, or the Central Depression. Okay, so within this region, we have something called the Valdine Hills, and it's going to be considered the center of the plains. And what's going to separate these lakes and these waters is going to be this region. Okay, we see the Baltic and the White Seas. Okay, over here, White Seas and the Baltic Sea. And then the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea right here. Okay, so this region right here is going to be broken up by the Validian Hills. Okay, the Validian Hills run this region right here. We see the Baltic Sea right here. Go up here. Here's the White Seas, the Black Sea. It's going to be broken up by the Validian Hills and the Caspian Sea. Okay, so we see that this Low Europe, or this central region, is going to be between the secondary highlands, and then the primary highlands right here. All right, so who was the partner of Europe? That's right, 12 gauge. Africa. Okay, so when we look at Africa, we see that there is going to be the general information. Okay, we see that the mountain ranges are going to primarily be around the coast. Okay, they're not really going to cut through the middle of the continent. Okay, so that's the mountain ranges. However, within the center of the continent, there's going to be a plateau of less elevation that occupies the interior. Okay, the central region is going to be made up of a plateau rather than a plain. Okay, which causes Africa to be a place of less power, less civilization, less economics. Okay, we see that this is why Africa will never be a seat of power. This is part of that. We had talked about that. Okay, so the primary highlands. So what causes this to be unique compared to the last three is that the primary highlands is on the east. Okay, the west is over here. The east, we see this right here. We see these mountains right here. Okay, this is the primary highlands. Okay, it extends from the Isthmus of Suez, okay, up here, this region right here, to the Cape of Good Hope, which is way down here at the bottom of the continent. And so we'll look at this here in a second. But the major points of the primary highlands are the snowy heights of Kenya's mountain Kilimanjaro, okay, in this region right here, okay, which is near the equator, to the snowy mountains in the south. Okay, south down here, these are the snow mountains. Okay, we see this. Okay, so those are the primary highlands. Okay, so if the primary highlands were in the east of the continent, that would mean that the secondary highlands are most likely to the west. Okay, that's correct. Okay, we see that the secondary highlands are going to be out here to the west, but also up north. Okay, so they're going to border the north and western coast. Okay, the Atlas Mountains to the north up here, close to Europe, close to Spain. Okay, near the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, here's the Mediterranean Sea right here. And then the Kong and Cameroon mountains of the west are going to be over here. Okay, so we see that this region right here is going to be the secondary highlands. Okay, so what is the famous desert that is in Africa? That's right, the Sahara. Okay, we see this when we think of Egypt. Okay, we think of the Sahara. We hear the Egyptians chasing the Israelites into the desert. Okay, the desert is the Sahara. Okay, so that is going to be the interior, the central region of the continent. Okay, we see that it extends mainly up here, but we see that it works its way down a little bit south on this part of the continent. Okay, we see this. Okay, the interior, okay, this plateau region is divided into two major sections. Okay, one, it is going to consist of prairies and fertile river basins. Okay, when you're looking at the image, where do you think the prairies and fertile river basins are? That's right. It's in the green. Okay, the green is for vegetation. So that means that the arid Sahara is this tan or this desert look. Okay, this are the two regions of this plateau, this interior. Sahara up north, the prairies and fertile river basins are right here in the south. Okay, we see this. This is the interior. Okay, the primary highlands are different in Africa. They're out here in the east. Secondary highlands are in the north and west over here. And then the interior or the central depression is this region right here in this middle, extending down here. Okay, good job, guys. All right, so the last two continents that were paired together are what, Carly? Asia and Australia. Good, good. All right, so when we think of Asia, we think of what? What do you think of when you hear of Asia? Like the land, not the people, but the land of Asia. Okay, maybe some forest, bamboo, some water. So thinking of the general laws of continental relief, what do you think? It's going to be similar to this. It's going to be similar to the other continents. All right, so when we look at Asia, it's going to be divided into two parts. Okay, it's going to be high and low Asia. Okay, that's the general information about Asia. Okay, high and low. So within the primary highlands, the various mountain chains which radiate from the central elevated region known as the plateau of Pamir. Okay. Okay, this is going to be the primary highlands. Okay, this region right here. Okay, so the plateau of Tibet. Okay, this plateau is going to be in between the Himalayas of the south and the Konulu Mountains of the north. All right, so we see this. Okay, the Himalayas. What mountain is in the Himalayas? That's right, Kiki. Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, is in the Himalayas. Okay, so when we hear about the plateau of Tibet, it's this lesser elevated area between these two mountain systems. All right, and then the other part of the primary highlands is the Pamir. Okay, the plateau of Pamir. Okay, so this is a very unique part of the world. Okay, it's going to start three mountain systems. Okay, three mountain ranges. Okay, so the Pamir, it's called the roof of the world. Okay, it's up near the Arctic Circle. And it's going to have three massive mountain chains project from, I guess, south from the top of the world, in a sense. Okay, so from the three corners, these three areas are going to project out. Okay, so starting in the southeast corner, the Himalayas, the Karakoram, and the Konulu are going to extend north. Okay, starting in the northeast corner, the Taishan range is going to move out, and then starting in the southwestern corner, the Hindu Kush range is going to move out. Okay, so when we look at this, we see that the Himalayas, the Karakoram, and the Konulu are going to be starting here. We see that the southwest corner is going to be down here, and then the northeast is going to be up here. Okay, we see that these mountain ranges are moving in three directions towards the center. Okay, northeast to the center, the southeast to the center, and then the southwest to the center. Okay, so they're all going to kind of converge in this general area. Okay, and so those are the primary highlands. Now, the secondary highlands of Asia are going to be the Altai Mountains, the Great Khingan Range, and the subordinate plateaus of the continent. Okay, so basically every other elevation in the continent that are not part of the primary range highlands are going to be a part of the secondary highlands. Pretty simple. So basically the bulk of it is going to be in this region over here. Okay, in the northwest area near the Ural Mountains. Okay. So what we see is that the Mongolian desert and the plains of Siberia, so plains of Siberia are up here, the Mongolian desert is going to be down here, are going to be separated by the Altai Mountains, okay, right here. And so last but not least, okay, we're going to talk about the Great Lowlands. So the Great Lowlands, or the Central Depression of Asia, are going to be mainly up in this region. Okay, when you're looking at this, the green is going to be flat regions. Okay, so it lies to the north, which it extends from the Arctic Circle, the Arctic Ocean up here, southward to the base of the Altai Mountains. Okay, right here. So this region up here is going to be the Great Lowlands, and within these lands, it's going to be comprised of the Kring Steppes and the Siberian Plain. Okay, so this region up here is going to be the lowlands. So this is going to be unique. We saw that for the most part that the primary and the secondary highlands are separated by the Great Depression or the Great Lowlands. However, that's not true with Asia. We see that both the primary and the secondary are going to be similar and are not going to be separated by the Great Lowlands. The Great Lowlands are not going to be separating the two. All right, so last but not least, Australia. Okay, there's not a lot to Australia, but we see that the general information is that it resembles Africa when it conforms to the general law of continental relief. We see that the borders are going to be the elevated, okay, are going to be the mountain ranges, the primary and the secondary. And then within the middle, there's going to be that depressed interior. Okay. So the primary highlands, just like Africa, is that they lie on the east coast. Okay, over here, east coast. Okay, North and South America are going to lie, the primary highlands lied on the, yes, the west coast. Okay, so this is going to be different. Okay, this is going to be another reason why Australia will never be a seat of power. Okay, it's going to not be as great for crops. It's going to be a place for mainly animals and not for civilization. It's going to be still, it's going to be a part of God's story, but not going to be like play a huge part. And so within the primary highlands over here on the east coast, it starts with Australian Alps and then works its way to the York Peninsula. Okay, York Peninsula. And right here we have the Australian Alps. Okay, this range right here. All right. So the secondary highlands, this region right here, borders western and northwestern of the continent. Okay, so this region right here. Now, the last thing, though, that is different from Asia is that the large area in between the primary and the secondary is the central lowlands. Okay, this large area is primarily deserts. Okay, now, yes, there are small portions such as the Darling and the Murray rivers. We see these rivers right here, you know, which form some basins, which form, you know, different areas where they can grow crops, and that there are several lakes within there that are, you know, salt lakes. But we see that the bulk of Australia here in the middle is going to be a desert. There are some lakes, but there are in some rivers, but very, very few. So the bulk of the central lowlands is going to be a desert. Now, when we come to the continents, remember we talked about there's 6 continents, and then the rest of everything else was classified as what? Mallory? Ooh, okay. Close, close. Anyone? Marshall? That's right. Islands. Okay, so islands are these smaller landforms that God created. Okay, they're not the 6 main continents, but they are still purposeful and still are part of this wonderful mechanism that God created. And so the 2 types of islands are continental and oceanic. Okay, we talked about these. So we're going to talk about continental first. All right, so continental. What is a continental island? Well, continental islands are islands that are situated near the continents. Okay, they are close in proximity. Okay, usually these continental islands form a parallel to the coast of the continent. Okay, this is a great example. Look at Japan right here. This these islands, these continental islands, run parallel to Asia, to the main continent. They run parallel. When you look at North America, up in Alaska, and when you look off the East Coast, okay, there's some islands that are running parallel to the coast. Okay, these are continental islands. These are landforms that were created. All right, so if continental islands are usually islands that are on that run close and are running parallel to a continent, to the coast of a continent. What would be an oceanic island then? That's right. They're not near the island. They're not near islands. They're not near a coast. They're not near the continent. Good job. All right. So oceanic are going to be situated in mid-ocean, far away from continents. So an example, what's one of our states here in the US that's an oceanic island? That's right, Gage. Hawaii. Hawaii is an example of an oceanic continent. All right. And within each of these oceanic islands, there are two types of islands that are created. Okay, these islands are created either by volcanic products or by coral. Okay, those are the two type of islands that are created. Okay, oceanic islands. All right, the first type of oceanic island that we're going to talk about is a volcanic island. Okay, these islands are arranged around the volcanic belts which traverse the globe. We talked about the volcanic belts, oh man, like 2-3 weeks ago, forever ago, it feels like. And these islands, for the most part, fall within those belts. And the bulk of these are going to be found within the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, okay, near Asia, in North America, and Europe, okay. The bulk of these islands are going to be found within these ocean belts, within these volcanic belts in these oceans. And so these islands are going to be formed by submerged volcanoes. So remember, I talked about how when a volcano throws up, they're going to spew out material. And so when these submerged volcanoes throw up their materials, they are going to be creating a island. And so the more material that they throw up, the more land that's going to be formed and the higher the elevation. Okay. And so these volcano islands are going to be formed by volcanoes throwing up material and accumulating a mound in a sense. All right. So the next type of island is a coral island. So these coral islands are going to be formed mostly by coral polyps. And there are going to be three types of coral reefs. Okay, the first type is a fringing, second is a barrier, and third is atolls. Okay, so the fringing reefs are going to be bands of coral rising a few feet above the water and surrounding islands or skirting the shores of continents. Okay, so these type of islands are going to be formed by coral. okay, creating these areas. Okay, the second type of coral islands are going to be called barrier reefs. We usually hear about this a lot because they have similarities to fringing reefs. However, they are located away from land. They're going to be located out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, these massive coral polyps are going to form basically an island of their own out away from other landforms. Okay, so fringing reefs are these coral that are going to form part of an island that's already, so it's going to surround another island and it's going to help create a larger island of that already island. And then the third type is atolls. Okay, so atoll reefs are going to be that of an island. So an island was originally there. These atolls, these reefs, this coral polyps are going to be around those islands, and then that island disappears for whatever reason. Maybe the water raised up, whatever it is, and so it's going to leave this massive ring, and there's going to be an empty area within it, and so it's going to be called a lagoon. Okay, that area, when you hear of lagoons, okay, it's this water area surrounded with land on all sides. That's what's forming. An atoll is this island that was formerly there. There was reefs around it. That island disappeared for some reason, and that reef is still there, and so it's going to create a lagoon. Okay, so we see that these lands, this land is going to be part of God's creation. Okay, it's a specific mechanism in his story. Okay, yes, it's only a small part of the entire earth, but it plays a crucial part in his story, a crucial part in his process. And so we see that God is directing everything towards his ends and towards his means. Well, thank you guys. I hope that you've had a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.